In mid-1980s, a sinister shadow crept across Southern California. Residents went to bed each night in dread, wondering if a silent intruder might slip through a window in the darkness. A ruthless predator was stalking the night, attacking strangers in their own homes, an unpredictable killer who seemed to strike without pattern or pity. This is the story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and a journey into the mind of one of the most vicious serial killers in American history. Early life and dark influences. Richard Ramirez was not born a killer. He was shaped into one. He grew up in a troubled household in El Paso, Texas, where violence was a grim fact of life. His father was physically abusive, prone to explosive anger. As a child, Richard also fell under the sway of an older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, a Vietnam War veteran. Mike glorified violence. He would recount gruesome war stories and even showed young Richard Polaroid photos of Vietnamese women he had raped and mutilated. In 1973, 13-year-old Richard witnessed Mike fatally shoot his own wife during a domestic argument, a trauma that seared a grotesque lesson into the impressionable teen's mind. This toxic mentorship and exposure to death planted the seeds for Richard's warped psyche. By his teen years, Ramirez was sleeping in cemeteries, abusing LSD and other drugs, and cultivating an interest in Satanism. He also suffered multiple head injuries as a child, including one severe head trauma from a swing accident that led to epileptic seizures, which some experts believe may have damaged the parts of his brain controlling impulse and emotion. All these factors mixed into a deadly formula. Through his adolescence, Richard's behavior grew increasingly antisocial. He learned stealth and violence from cousin Mike, even techniques like silently creeping into homes and slashing throats. In effect, Ramirez's childhood was a masterclass in brutality, normalizing horrors that most of us could barely imagine. A random reign of terror. In 1984, at age 24, Richard Ramirez's dark impulses exploded into a real-life horror story. He moved from Texas to California and soon began a crime spree so cruel and random that it baffled investigators. As far as authorities know, his first murder was on June 28, 1984. That night, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment, her throat slashed ear to ear and her body stabbed repeatedly. The scene was shockingly violent, but at the time it appeared isolated. No one yet knew this was only the beginning. 8 months of eerie, quiet passed. Then, in the spring of 1985, all hell broke loose. A series of brutal attacks spread fear across the Los Angeles area. In March 1985, within a single day, Ramirez committed multiple assaults seemingly at random. In one incident, he pulled 30-year-old Cillian Veronica Yu out of her car in Monterey Park and shot her death on the road. That same evening, he broke into a home in nearby Rosemead, shooting 34-year-old Dale Okazaki in the forehead and critically wounding Okazaki's roommate, Maria Hernandez, who miraculously survived by shielding herself with her car keys. Ramirez did not stop there. He stormed into the Whittier home of Vincent and Maxine Zazera and slaughtered the couple in their bed. Vincent was shot instantly, but Maxine was bound and subjected to unspeakable torture. Ramirez raped and stabbed her, and in a final act of depravity, gouged out her eyes. The sheer sadism of this crime scene stunned even veteran detectives. Ramirez was no ordinary killer. He reveled in cruelty. He sometimes forced his victims to swear to Satan as he abused them, and he left occult symbols at several murder scenes. At one house, he drew a pentagram, the mark of the devil, on a wall and even on a victim's body in lipstick. Unlike many serial killers, Richard Ramirez had no clear victim profile. His victims were men and women, young and old, of different ethnicities and neighborhoods. No one felt safe. He used a wild variety of methods, shooting some victims, stabbing or bludgeoning others, and often mutilating bodies or performing sexual assault. At times he crept in silently and killed swiftly. Other times he toyed with victims first, deriving pleasure from their terror. In one case, he abducted a 6-year-old girl from her bedroom, sexually assaulted her, then let her go on the side of a road, an act as baffling as it was heinous. This unpredictability made him especially terrifying. As Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detective Gil Carrillo later observed, there aren't any other documented cases in which one person lashed out at victims in such a disparate manner. The media gave this phantom various nicknames, the Valley Intruder and the Walk-In Killer, but one name would stick and strike fear into millions: the Night Stalker. Each new attack brought front-page headlines and public panic. Southern California in summer 1985 was gripped by collective anxiety. People started adding extra locks, barred windows, and even guard dogs to their homes. Sales of guns, alarm systems, and home security devices skyrocketed. Ramirez struck in Los Angeles County, but also as far north as San Francisco and as far south as Orange County. The geographic range and randomness compounded the fear. The killer could be anywhere, and anyone could be a target. He sometimes slipped into homes through an open window, or simply walked in through an unlocked door, earning another nickname in the press: the Walk-In Killer. The Night Stalker turned the simple act of going to sleep into a source of dread. Manhunt, terror, and the Night Stalker. Investigators faced enormous pressure to stop this madman, but the case was a detective's nightmare. With such varied victims and methods, police struggled to connect the crimes at first, not realizing they were dealing with a single perpetrator. It took the keen insight of a young Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detective, Gil Carrillo, to discern the pattern. Carrillo noticed a distinctive signature of psychological sadism tying the cases together. For instance, at the Okazaki crime scene, he deduced that the killer deliberately waited for the victim to see him before shooting her, relishing her fear. Detective Carrillo recalled that the Night Stalker was getting off on the terror in his victim's eyes. There was a fear factor. He was getting off on that. There is a sexual deviancy to it, Carrillo explained. This was no ordinary burglar or robber. It was a serial predator feeding on fear. Carrillo's theory of a single suspect initially met skepticism within the department. After all, as he pointed out, nobody in modern criminal history had been documented doing all these things: molestation, rape, murder across age and gender lines in one spree. But as the bodies and survivor reports continued to mount, the evidence started to support Carrillo's intuition. He teamed up with veteran homicide detective Frank Salerno, famous for cracking the Hillside Strangler case. Together, they led a sprawling multi-agency task force in a desperate game of cat and mouse with the Night Stalker.
One break in the investigation came from the killer's own carelessness. In one attack, a witness glimpsed a suspicious car, an orange Toyota, near the crime scene. Police traced that stolen car and found it abandoned, but not before retrieving a crucial clue: a single fingerprint left on the vehicle's mirror. In 1985, fingerprint databases were not computerized as they are today. Detectives had to compare prints manually, which meant they needed a suspect's print on file to find a match. At that point, they still had no name for the Night Stalker. Meanwhile, tips were pouring in by the thousands. Surviving victims and witnesses described a tall, gaunt young man with curly hair and rotten, stained teeth, a detail that stood out in every account. Composite sketches were circulated in newspapers and on TV. One LAPD sketch artist, Fernando Ponce, produced an infamous drawing of the suspect with bulging eyes and a sinister grin that haunted the public for weeks. Eventually, a tip from the public provided a vital lead. A local teenage boy unwittingly heard a friend of his older brother boast about weird things and knowledge of crimes. This man, named Rick, was from El Paso, the same hometown mentioned in some clues. Detectives in Los Angeles and San Francisco followed the El Paso connection, and finally, the name Richard Ramirez surfaced. Police quickly pulled Ramirez's 1984 mugshot from a past auto theft arrest and got a match to the fingerprint from the stolen car. After months of terror, they at last had a name and a face for the Night Stalker. On August 30th, 1985, authorities decided to go public. They released Richard Ramirez's name and photograph to the media, broadcasting that the Night Stalker was no longer a faceless phantom. By the next morning, every major newspaper splashed Ramirez's mugshot on the front page. Los Angeles residents woke up to the terrifying face of the man who had haunted their nightmares. And Ramirez himself saw it too. Unaware that he'd been identified, Ramirez walked into a liquor store that morning and glanced at a newspaper, only to see his own eyes staring back. Panicked, he fled the store and ran into the streets of East Los Angeles. But the hunter was about to become the hunted. Capture of a killer. It was broad daylight, August 31st, 1985, and the Night Stalker was on a run in a working-class Latino neighborhood. Ramirez tried to carjack a woman, yelling at her in Spanish to give up her keys. The woman's husband, hearing the commotion, rushed out with a metal bar and struck Ramirez over the head. Richard staggered, then bolted, desperate to escape. But by now, residents of the area were recognizing him from the newspapers they were literally holding in their hands. A group of enraged neighbors gave chase, determined to do what months of police work hadn't yet accomplished. They caught up with Ramirez and tackled him to the pavement, pummeling him mercilessly. One man recalled hitting Ramirez with a fence post, as others kicked and restrained him. It was a moment of cathartic street justice, the community taking down the predator in their midst. By the time police arrived, the attacker was subdued and bloodied, literally saved from the angry mob by the officers. As they handcuffed him, Ramirez had a twisted smirk. He looked up and uttered a startling, self-satisfied admission. "It's me," he said, acknowledging that he was the infamous Night Stalker. Ramirez was promptly arrested and taken to the police station. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd of hundreds formed outside the station, cheering and shouting in relief and triumph. The city that had cowered in fear just days before was now celebrating the monster's capture. As officers escorted Richard Ramirez out of the Hollenbeck station to transfer him to jail, onlookers yelled, "Asesino!" Murderer in Spanish, and applauded. Even the hardened detectives, Carrillo and Salerno, couldn't help but feel awed by the public's raw emotion at seeing evil in handcuffs. One photograph captures Ramirez being let out, flanked by Detective Carrillo on one side and Detective Salerno on the other. The killer's eyes are downcast, a bruise on his forehead from the beating. For once, he looks small and ordinary, just a 25-year-old drifter in a dirty shirt. Not the supernatural demon he had made himself out to be. The devil in court, Ramirez's trial. With Ramirez in custody, the focus shifted to the courtroom, but the drama was far from over. The trial of Richard Ramirez became a media circus and a psychological spectacle. He was charged with a staggering 43 felony counts, including 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. In July 1988, Ramirez made his first court appearance and pleaded not guilty to all charges. In the courtroom, he cultivated a menacing image. He often dressed in black and wore dark sunglasses, smirking at cameras. In a notorious early hearing, Ramirez held up his palm, where he had drawn a pentagram, and yelled "Hail Satan" to a stunned courtroom as he was let out. This theatrics only cemented his image as a self-styled devil worshiper, exactly what he wanted the world to see. The trial dragged on for over a year, delayed by numerous issues, including one juror being murdered unrelated to case. Throughout the proceedings, Ramirez showed no remorse whatsoever. He would often grin or laugh at disturbing testimony. Deputy District Attorney Alan Yokelson, one of the prosecutors, noted, "It's clear at this stage that he shows no remorse," after observing Ramirez casually chat with his attorney and smile after hearing graphic victim impact statements. In fact, Ramirez seemed to revel in the attention. Crowds of spectators and reporters packed the courtroom daily. Disturbingly, he even attracted a group of female followers who found him cute or mysterious, a macabre phenomenon where some people became infatuated with a killer, sending him love letters and cheering his outlaw persona. One devotee would eventually become his wife in 1996, marrying Ramirez while he sat on death row. In September 1989, the jury returned its verdict. Richard Ramirez was found guilty on all counts. The conviction brought a palpable sense of relief to California. Yet, true to form, Ramirez had one final act of defiance. At his formal sentencing, he addressed the court with a chilling, grandiose speech. He declared, "You don't understand me. You are not expected to. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil." He then warned, asterisk, I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all. Asterisk, it was a disturbing glimpse into the warped mind of man who saw himself as an instrument of darkness. As he was led away to face the gas chamber, Ramirez looked at the reporters and uttered a final infamous taunt. Asterisk, big deal. Death always comes with the territory. See you in Disneyland. Asterisk his words, flippant and remorseless, perfectly encapsulated his narcissism and complete lack of empathy. Judge Michael Tynan, who presided over the case, did not mince words in his final statement. He told Ramirez that his actions showed cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding, noting the obscene gouging out of victims' eyes and other horrors. The judge then pronounced the ultimate penalty, the death sentence, 19 times over. In California, however, death sentences automatically trigger long appeals. Ramirez was shipped to San Quentin State Prison to await execution on death row, a wait that would last more than 2 decades. In the end, the Night Stalker met a mundane fate. On June 7, 2013, Richard Ramirez died of complications from cancer while still on death row at age 53. He spent 23 years behind bars, showing no genuine remorse to the very end. Inside the mind of a monster, what drove Richard Ramirez to commit such nightmarish acts? Psychologists and criminologists have pored over that question for years, and his case offers a fascinating, if frightening, profile. Ramirez has been described as a textbook sociopath and psychopath. One forensic analysis estimated that Ramirez would score extremely high on the Hare psychopathy checklist, exhibiting traits like grandiosity, manipulation, lack of empathy, and impulsivity in spades. He certainly showed no empathy or guilt for his crimes, mocking his victims and relishing the retelling of his deeds. He was also a narcissist who cultivated a satanic rock star image to stand out. During interviews and letters from prison, Ramirez never apologized. Instead, he coolly stated, "We are all evil in some form or another," as if to rationalize his behavior. Criminal profilers noted that Ramirez was an unusual mix of an organized and disorganized killer. He was capable of plotting out burglaries, using cunning and stealth to enter homes, learned from his cousin's training, and he often brought weapons or found them at the scene. Yet his actual violence was frenzied and chaotic, leaving behind blood, evidence, and often survivors. This duality made him hard to predict or categorize. He killed for power and thrill rather than necessity. A probation report later suggested that while Ramirez initially stole valuables from victims, such rewards became secondary to his perverted gratification. In other words, the true payoff for him was the suffering he inflicted. He derived sexual excitement from dominance and pain, earning him the label of a sexual sadist. Detectives like Gil Carrillo picked up on this early, noticing Ramirez's pattern of instilling fear and taking pleasure in it. The Night Stalker, it turned out, was a predator who needed to see raw terror in his victim's eyes as part of his grotesque ritual. Ramirez's obsession with Satanism further fueled his sense of identity. He wasn't literally driven by cult orders or anything of that sort, but embracing satanic imagery gave him a persona of ultimate rebellion and evil. He reportedly would play AC/DC's song Night Prowler, from which the media-derived moniker Night Stalker partly originated, and study occult symbols. This devil worship shtick amplified his aura of fear and may have helped him feel powerful or beyond good and evil, as he claimed. Psychologists note that such external evil posturing can be a way for a sadistic killer to rationalize their acts, casting themselves as a villain in their own horror movie, so to speak. Indeed, Ramirez often spoke as if he were on a grand mission for Lucifer, rather than admitting he was a deeply broken human acting out trauma and depravity. In the end, experts see Ramirez as a product of a perfect storm of criminogenic factors: a brutal childhood, possible neurological damage, substance abuse, violent role models, and profound psychological abnormality. One criminologist, Dr. Scott Bond, pointed out that Ramirez fit the profile of a remorseless psychopath shaped by early exposure to abuse and violence. The Night Stalker persona was almost a logical culmination of Richard's life experiences, a persona he created and ultimately embraced fully to become the very monster he was taught to admire as a boy. As one analysis summarized, Ramirez was a highly impulsive, sadistic psychopath with no regard for human life. Legacy: why the case still haunts us. The case of Richard Ramirez remains one of the most disturbing and fascinating in American true crime lore. Even decades later, it continues to terrify and captivate people. Why does the Night Stalker still send chills down our spines? Perhaps because his crimes fundamentally violated the sense of safety we take for granted in our homes. Ramirez attacked at random, often in the dead of night, entering through unlocked doors and windows. The idea that anyone, from a child to an elderly grandmother, could be next was every person's worst nightmare. As writer Gil Carrillo, who interviewed Ramirez extensively, wrote, "Ramirez was a serial killer who came for you in your own bed, an embodiment of pure predator instinct. Moreover, the Ramirez case shines a light on the darkest corners of human psychology. It forces us to confront the existence of true evil, the kind that isn't easily explained by simple motives like greed or jealousy. Ramirez had no clear motive beyond cruelty and domination. In his mind, he was living out a grandiose drama of good versus evil, where he chose to be evil. This makes for a morbidly compelling story. It's why numerous books, documentaries, and even TV series, Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer on Netflix, for example, continue to revisit the case, trying to make sense of the senseless. We are horrified by Ramirez's deeds, yet we also seek to understand how a human being can become so monstrous. The psychological puzzle is both frightening and intriguing, drawing true crime fans again and again. Finally, the case is remembered for its dramatic resolution. The image of ordinary citizens banding together to capture a killer remains iconic and oddly uplifting. After months of fear, it was a community that literally took the Night Stalker down, proving that even most savage criminal is ultimately no match for the collective will of decent people. In the courtroom, when Ramirez flashed his pentagram and sneered, "Hail Satan," spectators answered with simple, profound response. They showed up day after day, staring him down and testifying to his atrocities, ensuring that justice would be served in the earthly realm. Richard Ramirez once said, "We've all got the power to kill in our hands, but most of us are afraid to use it. Those who aren't control life itself." In his twisted worldview, terror equaled power. Yet in the end, his power was an illusion, snuffed out by the resilience of survivors, the dedication of law enforcement, and the courage of bystanders who refused to let fear prevail. The Night Stalker's story continues to fascinate and horrify because it reminds us of the fragility of safety, the reality of evil, and the strength of a community united against darkness. To this day, the name Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, remains a byword for nightmares, a case we study in hopes of preventing its like from ever happening again, and a chilling journey into the mind of true monstrosity.